Alright, so here we are with the Yamaha TW200. It's a weird little fat tire motorcycle that came out in I think 1986 and hasn't really been changed since then. Maybe the addition of a front disc brake and some other very minor things since that time. This isn't going to be a normal review where the bike's all pristine and clean because this thing's got some mud on it. It's ridden how this bike's supposed to be ridden. If you have one of these and use it for the intended purpose, it's probably going to be a little more muddy and dirty than it is going to be clean, a little more often. Because this bike begs you to take it off road. On the road, it's the whole time it's like, take me off road, let's hit a trail. So this is going to be a off-road review of this. I might get a little on-road action somewhere in the middle, but this is going to be a short little review on this TW200. Alright, so first of all, this thing is about 289 pounds. It's got a 196cc single-cylinder Yamaha engine in there with a carburetor, and it's got a little bit over 10 inches of ground clearance. Some things that I really like about this bike, it's light, it's very nimble. It's about, like I said, 289 pounds. It is basically an off-road scooter or off-road moped type deal. It's super fun off-road. It's lightweight. The seat height is pretty low. I think it's about 30 or so inches. Easily flat foot. I'm about 6 foot tall. My knees are bent when I'm flat footing on this thing. It's very beginner friendly. It's not got enough power. I think it's probably got around 12 horsepower or something like that. It's not going to get away from you. Beginner, this is actually the first bike I rode. It's intimidating at first, like everything is when you first start riding, but you get confidence on this bike really quick. It's very confidence inspiring, off-road and on-road, because these are large tires. Off-road, this thing is basically an unstoppable tree climbing mountain goat machine. It can climb a tree if you point it up it and you got it in first gear. It's a bulletproof engine. This engine, not a lot of issues with this. People have gotten thousands and thousands of miles out of these things with just basic maintenance, and they're apparently pretty bulletproof. It's really fun to rip through the gears on this bike because you could redline every gear in this thing up to 5th, and you'll be doing 50 miles an hour, something like that. Like, you're not going to get arrested for breaking the speed limit unless you're doing it in a 20 or something, because this bike is not a high-speed monster. Also, the sound of this thing, for a stock exhaust, this thing sounds pretty radical. It's a little louder than most stock exhausts, and it's kind of funny because you got all that bark, but it doesn't have any of the bite. Alright, now some of the things that I don't really like about this, small CC engine. It's not going to be good long distance. You can't, if you're trying to use this as the off-road adventure bike and you're planning on doing multiple hundreds of miles in a day, I would skip this bike. This is a goat trail climbing, put around town kind of thing. If you live in it's a base camp bike, I would say, which by that I mean you take it where you want to be. In a center area, like take it to Colorado with you, like haul it there, and then get a base camp, and then go from there. Just go out every day in different directions and explore on this thing, because it's not going to get stuck. I don't like the suspension on this bike. It's a little short travel, not a lot of travel off-road. It's a little rougher than something that is more. It's got the taller seat height, which is, but part of that trade-off is the seat height is so low, but you don't have a lot of suspension travel. The ground clearance is part of that as well. So this does have a little tinfoil aluminum skid plate under there from the factory. I wouldn't trust that on anything sharp. I've partially landed on some solid rocks with it and pushed it up a little bit into the case and had it vibrating on the case, but I haven't punctured it, thankfully. Probably going to upgrade that if we do any more extreme operating on this thing. The power off-road complements the suspension nicely, because the suspension, it's kind of lacking, but you don't have enough power to really do anything, let's say, too crazy. You can jump it, I mean, if you really put your mind to it, but the suspension and the power are both, I think they complement each other nicely for this. Let's see, the highway speeds on this, if you're going to be doing 55 miles an hour, if you're going to be doing 55 miles an hour for any decent amount of time, I would probably skip this bike. It feels like you're hurting it a little bit. You're sitting up really high in RPMs, and it's screaming down the road, and even on the speedometer here, a big red 55 on there. They really don't want you going faster than 55 on this thing. I've seen people do 70, 75 on it on the interstate or something like that. I would never do that in this bike, personally. I feel like you're going to blow up the engine at that point. Alright, and for long distance, I probably would not recommend this bike either, just because that engine, it's not a touring motorcycle. Let's get that straight. This thing, long distances, they don't really mix. I did do half of the Arkansas Trans-American Trail on this. It was doable. It was a little rough, I'll tell you that. Some of the road sections of it, just trying to get up to 55 miles an hour. I mean, it's fun to rip through the gears on this, but it's probably not going to be your travel across America or Trans-American Trail motorcycle. People have done it. I think they're a little crazy. I personally wouldn't do it. If you're a little crazy, get it, go for it. It's a fun bike. It's got a fat tire, unlimited traction with that rear tire. You can lean this thing over and hang off the side of it like you're riding a street bike, but you can do it out in the dirt. Like, this thing is it's a weird machine. Not many other motorcycles like it. If you want a fat tire motorcycle that's going to have crazy amounts of off-road grip, I think this is going to be your bike. Now, where I think this rear tire really excels off-road, a lot of people would think, oh yeah, that thing's got a big old mud tire on it, or sand tire. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of this bike in the mud. I think it's due to the fact that the tires are so wide. They have a lot of surface area, so the weight is not pushing down on a small area, and so it kind of floats over the top of the slippery section of mud. It doesn't push deeper into it and find that harder, more compact section. So in the mud, it's actually pretty slidey. It slides around a lot. It just kind of does whatever. And the rear tire, once you get that thing gummed up with mud, it's basically impossible to get that mud cleaned out of it. So where I think this thing excels off-road is any seriously hardcore mountain ATV trails, something like that. A goat trail even. This thing will climb a mountain, and when you get to the top, it will ask for more. It's in that regards, I think this is the probably top 5 dual sport mountain climbing machines. The only exception to that is if it's a pretty steep mountain that the trail is pretty easy and you want to carry a lot of speed through it, you might not be getting a lot of speed on this bike. This thing will bog down on you climbing any serious incline unless you're in first or second. First gear on this thing, you can idle around in first gear with the clutch out, and the speed doesn't even register on the speedometer. You're going so slow. First gear on this thing is a low gear. This thing's basically a Jeep or a goat off-road, which kind of lends itself to more rock crawling than mudding as well, because mudding usually want a high tire speed to clear out the mud that gets caught up in the tire. Another thing that I really don't like about this bike is the chain. This is the second chain that I personally put on there, and it's a stock chain, and it's not good at all. I'll say probably you tighten it in the morning, get it in the spec right about, I don't know, 40 miles, come home, and it's got about 3 more inches of sag in it. This chain stretches super easily on this bike. Even with proper chain maintenance, it's the chain lifetime on these things that I've found, it's not very impressive, and it's got a little tiny chain on them too. But let's get this thing driving around and see how it sounds. All right, well, let's get this thing fired up. I'm gonna do a little walk around. You can listen to that. for a stock exhaust. I think it's got a pretty pretty decent sound. A little flip. Like, that's a pretty decent exhaust for a little 200cc bike. Another thing I forgot to mention about this thing, super easy to work on. There's a guy on YouTube, T-Dubs Kid, has some excellent tutorials on how to work on these things yourself. I mean, it's just a simple air-cooled single-cylinder engine. I mean, nothing complicated about it. Easy, do it yourself kind of thing. So let's just show off how slow this first gear can go. Like, clutch is out right now. Speed is not even registering. I'm just creeping along here. Probably doing a mile an hour, something like that. Like, this thing is a slow speed rock crawling machine. Stand up on it, you can lean it over. Very easy to control. This thing it's built for crawling around goat trails. There's no doubt about it. Like, this is a good goat trail climbing machine here. Man, this thing sounds good though for a stock exhaust on here. It is a little muddy out here, and like I said, I'm not a huge fan of this thing in the mud, so I'm going to take it a little easy on these turns here. I don't want it to go sliding out from underneath me. I've already done that more than once on this bike. I would not like to repeat that. But let's go do a little lap of the old track. See how she does. Got a little air on that. I mean, this thing off-road's got enough power. Off-road, you're probably not going to want any more power. Alright, all these leaves are covered up in mud here, so we've got to be careful around here. Get the rear end loose, which is it's really doing something on this thing, because this thing's got that huge tire. Cut around the mud. Like, look at that, switching the first gear, and this thing will just creep along any trail on this bike. Seriously impressively low gears. I know some people lower the gearing even more on these things, to where basically first gear is stopped, but you're moving barely, and you can really creep through some brush on that. This thing's not a horsepower monster by any means. It gets the job done off-road though. Little wide open throttle. Get on the little track I have around here. I mean, you can rip this thing pretty hard off-road, and it's pretty fun because you get to rip through all the gears. Get it leaned over on the side there. Yeah, this thing's super fun off-road. I have a DR650, and off-road I would probably take this. That thing's pretty heavy. A little log hop. Nothing to it. That first gear makes log hops easy. You just nose up to it, whack on the throttle. You're not going to loop it. It just hops right over. Didn't finish my track loop though, so let me complete that real quick. I mean, this thing sounds good. I still can't get over that logs in the road. Yeah, the suspension is a little rough, but this is also, it's funny, a lot of bikes off-road, you're going to be standing a lot of the time. This thing's more of a sit-down, casual cruiser, but when it's time to boogie, you can make this thing boogie. Like, we are boogieing. It's not going to replace your two-stroke dirt bike, though, that's for sure. Definitely a fun off-road scooter experience. Back to that first low gear here. Creep around a little bit. Yeah, you whiskey throttle this thing. I don't think the front end's coming up. Because that was about full throttle in first gear. Front end didn't really even feel like it got any life. Alright, well I guess we could go just on the road a little bit, check out a little on-road action. Talk about it a little more. There's a little berm. Alright, we are gloved up and we are ready to hit the road. Let me go ahead and pre-apologize for the wind noise. This setup I'm using, I just got earbuds that have mics on them and I'm using the audio off of that. Yeah, not a speed-even bike. You can get up to speed, but it's not going to be quick. It's not going to be pretty. Here we are cruising around 35 miles an hour. This bike really feels at home around 40 to 45 indicated. Any faster than that, and the engine RPMs, it makes you feel like you're abusing the bike a little bit. But 35 is fine on this thing. I think I'm in 5th gear too. Yeah, 5th gear. Another thing about this bike, you'll always be reaching for that 6th gear on this. I've ridden about 5,000 miles on this thing, and I still, usually once a day or once every ride, I try to pop it into 6th gear because I'm like, this can't be the last gear. This thing's too low. But it is. It's the last gear. So right off the bat, you're going to notice the TW has a heavier steering input than a lot of dual sports. And that's probably because of that big front tire up there. I believe that front tire is about the size of a normal rear tire on a dual sport. It's big. And the rear tire on this is even bigger. This is, I think, the suzukivanvan 200 and this, I think they share the same rear size tire or similar. But those are about the only two bikes I know of where you can get a rear tire that meaty, that thick. But I kind of like the heavy steering feel on this. It's still, you can still flip this thing around. It's very lightweight. You're not going to have any issues with that, and it handles surprisingly well for the size of the little knobs on this thing. Alright, we're going to get up to 55 here to show you how that is. Alright, that's 55. I'm going to slow it down though so I don't blow your mics and your speakers out with that wind noise. But yeah, here we are, we've got 45 indicated. This is really as fast as I would want to take this bike. It feels pretty good at 45. You can cruise all day at 45. 55, I wouldn't take any main highways on this bike. Definitely no interstate action. Back roads bogging on this thing, super fun though. And then listen to that engine. It just sounds so good. Alright. Oh yeah, every stop on this thing, you get to rip through the gears to get back up to speed, which is super fun. It's riding a slow bike fast is funner than riding a fast bike slow. Look at this corner on this thing. You can hang off of this thing, hang off the side all day long. It's got super big contact patch. These tires are basically the size of a sport bike tire with knobs on them. You have a super large contact patch. Definitely probably one of the better handling dual sports on the road. cruising along 35. It feels good 35. A lot of people don't like the stock tires on these, the trail wings. They call them death wings actually. But I mean, I've never had any issues with these tires. I kind of like them. Off-road, I might upgrade the front to a Shinko 244. A lot of people do that and say they like it. So that's probably, of course, for the rear tires, there's not much you can do. You can go more street-oriented on the rear, or you can stick an ATV tire on the rear, which I don't think is technically street legal, but people still do it. So, as far as the rear tire on this goes, this is probably the optimal tire if you're going to be using it as on or off-road. Front tire, I think the Shinko 244 would probably be a pretty good upgrade for this. Even though I have no issues with the stock front tire, the Shinko 244 would probably take the performance of the stock one and upgrade it a pretty good amount. I think it might last a bit longer too. And they're pretty decently cheap. Actually, I have a Shinko 244 on the rear of my DR650 and I like it a lot. And it was pretty cheap. I got it on there for about 5,000 miles. There's actually some life left in it still. Pretty surprising for such a cheap knobby dual-sport tire. It's about to go for another gear. I don't know if there is another gear. We could try it. No, I don't think there is, because yeah, that's it right there. It's a nice roll on for you. Yeah, if you risky throttle this, nothing's happening. It doesn't do anything. It makes a little more sound. You might feel it kind of move a little bit, but at the very maximum, when you risky throttle it, it might go 2 miles an hour faster. You're not going to be flipping this bike. This bike is a very beginner-friendly motorcycle in that regard. A lot of people think it's only for beginners, and I don't think that's true at all. I think it's a very rewarding bike to ride. It's not a speed demon bike, it's not a crazy track bike or anything, but it's very rewarding because you have to do everything right to keep up with momentum on this bike. Because you don't have that power at your right hand to accelerate out of a turn if you don't have enough momentum going into the turn. So you really carry your momentum on this bike, and it's very rewarding to ride in that regard. You get around some twisties and you still got your momentum going, and you're like, I hit all those lines perfectly. It's very fun to do that. The opposite end of that is if you don't do something right and you go into the curves at a low speed, you're going to be slowing down throughout it, probably losing speed, bogging down on this bike, which makes it even more rewarding when you do it correctly, because you know what could happen. And you're like, I don't have to slow down. I'm not bogging the bike down, I'm doing it good. Alright, I know this is a pretty straightforward road here, but I don't want to get this thing on the highway here, so I'm just going to turn around, go back. Man, this thing, road matching this thing sounds so cool. Alright, see, clutch is fully out, and I'm just tight little U-turn on this thing, no problem. And then we rock it back up to 35 miles an hour. That is one of my favorite things about this bike, is just how often you get to rip through the gears. Like you want to get up to 35 miles an hour, you get to rip through all 5 gears, like pushing them up in the RPMs. It's super fun to ride this thing. Unless you're going 55 or over. Stop and go, this is a bike. Stop and go. Stop light, stop light. This is really, if you did want to get this bike for some adventure touring, you would have to live somewhere like Colorado or something, be near a lot of the stuff you want to go adventure through. Because I've driven this bike, it doesn't sound like a lot, but I've done 200 miles a day on this, and people are like, oh, that's not very much. On this bike, that's a lot, because this bike doesn't go fast. It's got a hard seat, has no wind protection, doesn't even have hand guards for wind protection. Like, that's a lot of miles on this bike in a day. especially if you're trying to do 55 miles an hour, because it feels like the engine is hazy. But if you're doing, let's say 100 miles a day, this thing will probably do it at 45 at least. Like I said, everything I'm saying this thing is good for is under speeds of 45 miles an hour. Because above that, I wouldn't take this bike. That's the main reason I have the DR650 and this bike, is because I use the DR650 as an adventure touring kind of off-road bike, and I use this thing as an extreme off-road bike. I have done some extreme stuff in the DR650, and it is nowhere near as confidence-inspiring as this. This thing's seat height, it's with that low gear, this thing will it'll climb anything. DR650, you're riding the clutch, going slow, it's heavy, it's like 100 pounds heavier. It's not the best trail bike, but it'll do it. This thing, super great trail bike. It's the ultimate trail bike, dual sport in my opinion. It's just not that great on the road. It's fun on the road at slow speeds. A little corner action, like it just doesn't complain. That engine putting along. A lot of people call single cylinder stumpers. I would call this a putter. It doesn't really thump, but it puts. It puts just fine. If I was gonna buy this bike, I'd probably look for a early 2000s model. Just because it'll probably be a little cheaper, and you're not really missing out on any upgrades, because they haven't changed this bike really since it came out. I probably wouldn't go much older than maybe a 2005, something like that, just because at those ages, the maintenance, you don't really know what was done to it upkeep wise, and then you're gonna have things like fuel lines and stuff are gonna be dry rotting, and you just never know really. That's a long time to have a bike, especially if they have low miles. A bike with low miles that's really old isn't actually that great. These things start breaking down and they don't get used. Like, these things are designed to be ridden, and if you don't ride them, they're not designed to sit. So, man, this engine, it sounds ridiculous. Full. This thing's been, another thing, this thing's been on the ground more times than I can count, and the only thing that's given me any issues was I broke the ball off of the clutch lever, and I broke the brake lever. But other than that, I mean, I got some stress marks on the front little fairing there from hitting the ground pretty hard. But this thing it's pretty unstoppable. It's like you drop it, you hit the ground, you pick it up, and it runs better once you pick it up. It's pretty incredible in that regard. Alright, full throttle. And there's 45. Definitely not sport bike power, but you don't buy this bike for sport bike power. Honestly, around town, I bet you probably have a little more fun on this than you would a sport bike. Just because you're not going to be using really any of the sport bike's potential, but you can use all of the potential of this bike. It goes back to that slow bike fast, fast bike slow. You're going to be in first gear constantly on a sport bike. It's like, they go up to like the same things, like 90 miles an hour on some of them. This thing first gear goes up to like 10 miles an hour. You're going to be using your gears on this, and it's super fun to do that. You get to rev match all the time. It's a fun bike to ride around town. It's kind of like an off-road grom in some regards. I think actually, probably if you're looking at getting a grom, I might lean towards getting a TW200 instead, because you have that versatility of, yeah, I can also take this thing off-road. It's probably not as easy to wheelie as a grom, because that front tire up there weighs a lot. But I would probably honestly get this over a grom. I think it can go a little faster than a grom, and you can do insane things with this thing off-road. Can't really say that about a grom. Plus you get an extra gear. I think the grom's only got a 4-speed transmission. Don't quote me on that. I've seen a lot of people, and okay, what am I saying? A lot of people love the TW200 that I've met riding this thing, because it's so different than your average dualsport or dirt bike. Rear tires really set this thing apart, and I think it looks really good. When I first got the DR 650, I was looking at them next to each other, and the DR looked bizarre to me just because I was so used to seeing giant rear tires and front tire on this thing. But the DR looked pretty bizarre. Look at that, we're just straight off the road, right into the dirt. Just driving around. This thing loves it out here. It really comes alive once you get it off-road. Tires getting that traction, not spinning the tire on that turn. Always had traction, and it's even buddy out, so this thing's a unit. Working a little loose there, but you really got to work for it to break loose. Well, I think that was a pretty good overview of this little bike. If you have any questions, you can drop them down there. I'll answer them if I can get to them. Overall, I think this is a good bike. You got to know what you're gonna be doing with it going into buying one, because it's not a great road bike. That's for sure. If you're buying this thing as a trail bike that you can do some trail hopping, like drive on the roads a little bit between trails, this is an excellent choice. Would definitely recommend it for that purpose. If you're buying it as a beginner road bike, that's great too. I mean, this thing's going to get you anywhere. If you're buying it to do adventure touring, don't buy it. Don't buy it for adventure touring. It's not going to be an enjoyable time. But yeah, I think